Hey everybody, welcome to the Better Student Ministry Podcast. My name is Jared Berry.
And my name's Mark Freeman, and together we have over 30 years of youth ministry experience.
We created this resource to be of value to you and your youth ministry team. Hopefully you enjoy it, you benefit from it. Our goal is to invest in you as youth leaders so that you can invest in your students.
If you found this useful, please like and share with as many people as possible so that we can see better student ministries.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome back to Better Student Ministry Podcast. We're back with the special guest once again, Juli Durst, who's 12 years in kids ministry and also the New York Assemblies of God Kidmin Director. And great first conversation. Last time you were on, we talked about the importance of kids ministry, and Mark was so moved. He said, "I'm finally going to send my kids to kids ministry."
No, she knows full well. We send them there as frequently and as often as we can.
She is your kid's pastor.
That is true.
Yeah.
Yep.
But no, it was super inspiring to hear your passion about kids ministry and why it matters, and so we want to kind of flesh out the conversation because Mark and I have had a past really in youth ministry and do a lot in youth ministry, not as much in kids ministry, but we both worked on staff at churches. In fact, you two were on staff at the same church.
Yep.
Mark as youth, you as kids, and so we really felt like it's an important conversation to talk about how do we see healthy youth ministries, kids ministries working together. What does that look like? We have some people who do both. Some people
that's true.
Yes.
Some people are working on a church with another person, and there's some clashing. There's some whatever, So or they work at a church, and there's no even thought to how do they work together? Are they totally separate things?
Right.
So we wanted to kind of flesh that out today and talk about that, the three of us, about what does it look like with healthy youth ministry, healthy kids ministry are really working hand in hand. So I want to throw it out to you guys to start off and say, why is it important that we even think about this? Why does it matter that we think about the necessity for a kids ministry and a youth ministry to work together?
I think it's because holistic ministry is more effective. So just as a church, right, from birth to adulthood, like membership at your church, like we have to care about that journey. If we don't, you're probably going to lose people along the way. So I think the piece that is very helpful about Next Gen Ministries, and again, also working with adults in the church too, is that you kind of close the gap where you would normally kind of lose people, or build a bridge to get them from kidmin to youthmin up to young adults and then adult ministry as well, because sometimes we lose people in those transition times because they're, for whatever reasons, but those are key moments where if you aren't intentional, you may lose them. Because they're so different, right? Kidmin is so different than youth ministry, and rightly so, because they're in different stages of life. And then young adult ministry is very different and transient even, because they're all over the place and figuring out life, and they're in college, then they're home again, they're all, And then, of course, that transition into like adulthood, like, oh, okay, I'm here, I'm at this church, I'm going to become a member. Like, what does it look like now? So if we don't start teaching them at a young age about like how to be in the church, like how do you function in the body of Christ, they're just not going to know. Like they can see, of course, there is like they can watch what happens at church. But if we start intentionally and on purpose training them what it looks like to be in the church at a young age, it flows so much better, I think. So.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the goal is to like try to eliminate as many obstacles to faith as possible as ministers, right? And, I have an elementary education background as well. So like understanding, early childhood development and adolescent development, there's such a unique transition that happens in the brain of a kid going from young children being very concrete and not understanding abstract thoughts and ideas, which in a lot of ways theology is very abstract, right? There's certainly some concrete things related to it, but so helping students on a journey of, okay, these are the how their brains understand what we believe and why we believe it, and then transitioning usually, which takes place around that 5th, 6th, 7th grade, is when they start to think more abstractly, which is also where you start to get a lot of first crisis of faith stuff as it relates to, wait a minute, what I've been told about God is not necessarily my experience in faith and relationship with God. And so what does all this mean? And that's where then the relationship piece, if it's the first time they hear about having a personal relationship with God in youth ministry, and they haven't heard about it in kids ministries,
Yep.
then it is. You spoke about this a little bit in the previous episode. It goes from the checklist of this is what little girls and boys are supposed to do to be good boys and girls. Now all of a sudden I've got a relationship with God, and He knows all the bad things that I do. Why would He want to be in relationship with me? And then they start to be like, I can't get close to God. I say bad things and I think bad things, and But if they understand from the start, God has always been in this relationship with you, it starts to, I think, connect the dots for them, through their formative years.
Right. The other piece I think that is so important about Next Gen ministry, or working together, kids, youth, young adults, is the language we use. Because we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all discipling people to get closer to God, right? We want disciples to make disciples. We want these guys to be lifelong learners and followers of Jesus. And so I think a misstep is when Kidmin kind of functions one way and then youth ministry functions another way. We're all doing the same things, but we're using different terms, we're using different language. And so then the kids transition up to youth and they're like, oh, okay, now I have to learn this new set of things, when actually we're all the same. We're still teaching about prayer, the Bible, the Holy Spirit, living on mission, giving, being generous, serving in the local church. We're still teaching all of those same things. So I think kind of tweaking our language could be really helpful. So one thing we've done in our church is to start to use some of the same terms. So in our youth ministry, they have crews, and those are broken down by grade. So that's your small group, that's your people, and that's your crew. And so I've adopted that language down in Kidmin. So on Sundays, when we break out into our small group time, we don't call them small groups anymore. We call them crews. So now there's a first grade crew and a second grade crew, and that's your crew. Yeah. So now when they transition up to youth ministry, they already know this.
They're these are the people that we talk about stuff.
I've been in this
together.
crew for my whole life. Because they stay with their grade, right? Maybe sometimes they get, put together with another grade. But those are their people. And so that was a very simple, so easy little change to make. And it came about because we were talking. Yeah. So that's important.
How about also too, the familiarity that helps a fifth or sixth grader moving into the youth
transition,
ministry.
Yep.
I know this.
Right.
I'm familiar with this. Yeah.
Yeah, that comfort level of not feeling totally scared out of your mind to walk into the youth ministry when it feels familiar. That's a good point. And it comes from just talking, the youth pastor and the kids pastor talking together, having conversations about what they do in their spaces and figuring out what can we do to make this transition work better. Right. And are there different events that we can do together? So we, again, at my church, we do a fifth grade lock-in in June. It kind of ends that school year, but also it kind of ends their well, it doesn't end it because I actually keep them for the summer because I do not want to give up those kids. But so at our church, I go through fifth grade. So birth through fifth grade is what I oversee. And so once they become sixth graders, they join youth ministry. And so we have a fifth grade lock-in where it's me and a couple of my key leaders, all the fifth graders, and then the youth pastor with a couple of his key leaders, specifically the junior high leaders, right, that they're going to be working closely with once they come up to the youth group. So it's great because they feel safe or familiar with me and my leaders because we know them really, really well. And then they're meeting these other leaders and starting to get to know them really well. And it's a really fun time. Now, it's hilarious because a lot of my leaders tease me. It's not a true lock-in, I will be honest. I am old now. It only goes till 11 o'clock at night.
Oh, that's
and I just tell the kids, I know.
Yeah,
well, what I do, here's my justification. I tell them, we're locked in the building. I lock you in the building. To keep us safe, we are locked in. So this is a lock-in.
If it's not at least 3 a.m. and you're on your fourth Mountain Dew, it's not a lock-in.
Oh, I know, but see, I'm not young anymore.
If you're not screaming at some kids as they run down the hall at 4 in the morning.
No, can't do it anymore. Yeah. I did all that when I was younger. I cannot anymore. So we have that event, which helps kind of transition that moment of them getting to know new leaders. Yeah. And then in the summertime, right before they're about to start in the fall into the youth group and on midweek service, there's a special night that's kind of like almost like a meet your teacher, but meet your youth pastor and staff for the sixth graders. So it's just them. It's actually a night that the youth does not meet, but it's a special youth night for them where it's run just like a normal night so they can see what it's like, but it's just them and then student leaders there with the youth pastor and his staff. Parents are invited, so because this is a huge moment for parents too, right? Yeah. To leave the safety of Kidmin where everything is again locked down and totally safe and all those things are high alert, to then just be oh, there goes my little baby 6th grader, which is not that old, into the youth group is like terrifying for parents. So
Sure.
it's also a nice moment for parents to get to come in and see how the youth, service is run and what it's like, meet the staff. And so that's another event that we do to just kind of help transition and bridge that gap of them moving on up to this next stage of life.
That's good.
So,
In fact, I just went through that process because I have a set of twins that are 6th graders now, and we went to that first night. And you're right, Pastor Pablo preached for 45 minutes to the 6th graders, just like he would when
Getting them ready.
they got the full experience.
Well, I love the idea. So my son's in 7th grade, and he started youth group for the first time this year. And so I love the idea because, kids ministry, if they're doing their job well, is discipling kids for hopefully an extended period of time. And you've kind of referenced it's like, these are my babies, right? And so you have a vested interest in handing them off well.
Yes.
To continue the growth,
don't ruin it, youth men, okay?
Exactly.
I worked hard.
So for youth ministry, though, when a kids ministry is done well, it really helps set them up for success.
Absolutely.
Because they come in really in a whole different place. And I think what you guys talked about is so key, because when you are intentional about that transition, that's such a big moment, because think about it, like these kids go from being the oldest kids in the group, where they kind of run stuff. Some of them are kind of like, I'm too old for this now,
Oh yeah.
to all of a sudden being the youngest with like really big kids, because you're talking to like juniors and seniors in high school. And the parental point of view that you made is so true, because now parents are going like, well, what are they talking about? Like, I'm sending my 6th and 7th grader, and they're going to be hanging out with seniors in high school. Like, so there's a lot of like anticipation. And I know for my son, the moving from one to the other, like the anxiety about like, who's going to be there? Who am I going to meet is huge. So everything that you can do in working together, collaboration in helping these kids, I never did that as a youth pastor, honestly, was intentional about going and meeting who are the 6th graders in the kids ministry. We did a day where it was like, hey, welcome. But I didn't have really relationship with them before they came. And now I'm thinking, man, what a missed opportunity because of what were they feeling, what were the parents feeling, and how much better that would have been.
And so anytime that one of our faces can get in the other's space is really important. So when the youth pastor comes and teaches in the kids' church, like that's a win, because they're starting to get to know him. He's starting to get to know them. In our church, Pastor Pablo's wife was a small group leader, a crew leader for our 5th graders, so that she got to know those kids intentionally, because then they were going to be moving up the next year. So there are really great ways that you can work together and support the ministry as a whole, because we all need volunteers. But then also they're intentionally getting to know these kids as they come up. And then having like next gen meetings together where you discuss like, hey, you have 12 6th graders coming up this year. Here's what they're like. Here's what their like life is like at home. Here's what they're desiring spiritually, because we've had years of them where they're praying about the same thing every week, hoping and waiting for God to answer, or whatever it is. And so I think those are also valuable moments to like kind of clue the next staff in on like who they are. No, not too much, because let's say like sometimes it happens where like you give too many like, well, this kid
Except
is this
for Billy.
way.
We all know about Billy.
So like not in that way, but like in a positive way.
But I think you make a great point. It's so important, because in our culture today too, it used to be back in the day with youth ministry where parents, we've talked about this, parents would make their kids go. Like every year you'd have kids come in and they're like, they did not want to be there. Their parents are forcing them to be there. That is way less and less the case now. So it's not a guarantee
That's true.
that if they go to Kidsmen that they're coming to youth ministry. That is not a guarantee at all.
That's a good point.
It's likely that they could become a teenager and they fight their parents enough, and their parents are like, it's on a Wednesday too. It's not Sunday morning. All right, whatever. I don't care. If you have relationship and if there's intentionality, like all that to be said is it's so much more important, right?
It is.
Because they're not going to force their kids a lot of times to go to youth ministry.
And I think that would back up the just support and the need for good kidmen on Wednesday nights or your midweek service, whenever that is. So if kids already come and they're used to that pattern and they love being there, hopefully, again, that transition is real easy. They're already used to it. They're just going to keep coming on Wednesdays and because they're already hooked, like they want to be there,
right?
Because they enjoy it and it's part of their life. So they both matter. Kids ministry, youth ministry, they both matter, and we have to care about both so that they're both growing and healthy and doing well. I'd love to bring up Sunday mornings for kids, because if we graduate kids, like, so in my church, I only go up to 5th grade in Kidman, because we just noticed that 6th grade was it's such a tough year. Like, they are still young. A lot of them are only 11, but they're just past it because they're in middle school now, and like, they're big stuff, and I get it, right? And so I didn't ever want to like hold them back and make them feel like babies or anything. So there was a need, though, to figure out that shift from like kids church, where like, I mean, you're still learning about Jesus, you're having spiritual moments, but you have a lot of fun. Like you're running around, you have games, and you have time to like hang with your friends, to like lecture style, sitting in an adult service, like, what is happening? Like,
that's a big change.
It really is. And so I see the need for a class or some type of a group on a Sunday morning to help transition kids from kids church to the adult service. And so at our church, we create a class called Crossover to essentially help them cross over from Kidman to adult service, where it's just 6th and 7th graders. So it's not like a second youth group. It's just for that age. But it really does make a difference, I think, for them to just ease out of kids ministry into that adult service on a Sunday. And it's not so like jarring to like have to sit there in like a lecture style moment where you're like, what's happening? This is not kids church. So, and that has been a really nice discipleship time where they're really, it might be a little Sunday school-esque, in fact, where they're going through the Bible and they're teaching kids how to observe, interpret, and then apply what God's word says. But it's also youth group style, okay? Because every 5th Sunday there's a party, okay? So it is for sure youth grouped up for them. And I think it's just been a really huge win in our church, so that those kids don't just like drop off the map. We were noticing that kids that did not come from homes, I think we mentioned this earlier, that kids that are coming from like church families, they're just going to keep coming because their parents come on a Sunday. But some of the kids that were coming because they loved kids church and they wanted to be there, then all of a sudden weren't coming anymore on Sundays because they didn't have that transition moment to learn how to like get to that adult service and still be okay in there.
One of the things too that I think that I've observed both in that crossover piece as well as in the youth ministry, having those conversations with the staff is really important, but then having those conversations with the students and help. So the crossover class is a great opportunity to start having the conversations about, okay, what does this transition in your spirituality look like? But I also recognize the importance of having that conversation with your older youth students, your juniors and your seniors, about having these new 6th and 7th graders come in, and what is that going to look like for them, and how can they be intentional at being a part of that transition as well. And you know, we've talked about this in our youth ministry discussions numerous times. Like, if you can't help those juniors and seniors think differently about why they're there, they're going to be like, oh, we've done this 1,000 times. We play the same games over and over again. We've heard the same. Thanks a lot. You said that message last year for February as well. You know, but if they start thinking about their time in the youth ministry being outside of just themselves and pouring into other people, so in September or in July and August, start talking to your juniors and seniors about how do you want to invest in the young students that are coming up? How can you pour into them? Because somebody else poured into you because you're still here, and helping even the students think through, if they're not the ones going through the transition, but they're going to experience it as well, because now all of a sudden there's this influx of 6th or 7th graders that it's like, oh, now it feels like romper room in here again.
Absolutely. But even a junior and senior can understand that concept of spiritual legacy.
Absolutely.
Like, do you want to leave a spiritual legacy for this youth group that you have loved and been here for all these years? Like, yeah, you probably do. So let's bring you to that level. And I think, too, again, starting back in Kidman, to teach them to serve in the local church. Like, this is your church. Just as much as it's your parents' church, this is your church, too. So start serving now. I have a lead team in my kids' church that serves. And so they're very used to that. Well, the same is true in youth ministry. There's a lead team. They serve. And so it's very natural for them to give back and care about more than just themselves.
Sure. I pray this isn't a unique to our church thing, but one of the things I absolutely love, too, is the number of youth that serve on a Sunday morning in kids ministries as well. And you do a good job of balancing. They're not down there every week, right? Because you want them in service as well. Yeah. But how about those fourth and fifth graders who have been led in worship by some teenagers for the last 2 or 3 years? Now they have an immediate relationship of familiarity of faces. And as important as it was for us to get the leaders in front of them, you're also infusing their lives with teenagers early on as well, which is awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've talked about all the good stuff. Let's get down to the real nitty gritty.
What did I do wrong?
What are some of the real challenges? This is what people really want to hear. What are some of the real challenges when it comes to youth ministry and kids ministry?
Fighting over the same leaders.
Yes.
And the same financial pool.
Okay, let's talk about that.
That is legitimate.
Let's get into it. All right.
Because those people that are so passionate about the next generation are quality people and high capacity leaders. And so we both want them and both need them. Right?
Yeah.
And we trade them like baseball cards.
Yeah.
I'll give you
There's a draft every year
for
No, that is reality. Again, because they're a resource. And so we try so hard not to overuse people. And at the same time, utilize people that are good and that, love God and love kids and the next generation. So I do think there can be a win in changing, again, the language we use and say a next gen team. And so then that kind of melds, kids ministry and youth ministry together and kind of, not that we're sharing volunteers, because we kind of don't, but there's almost like a sharing of those events. Like I mentioned, the lock-in, we do another one called Covenant Quest to teach kids about communion. And so those are moments where I utilize youth leaders to come and do the skit or the teaching so that those older kiddos are starting to learn those leaders. And so it's not double dipping because they're not in with me all the time, but it does take a need off of my checklist of, people to run certain events, and it helps further this, the connections that are made within the church body for that transition when they get up to youth ministry. So I don't think you can always utilize the same people over and over again, but there are moments for you to kind of use both people from teams.
I tend to find that more often than not, there's not a lack of people. There's just a lack of people catching the vision for what you're doing.
Sure.
Unfortunately, as you've alluded in this and some others, you get lost in the basement of the church sometimes on a Sunday morning doing kids ministries. And if the people in your church are not aware of what's going on down there, there's a missed opportunity. Or on Wednesday nights when the youth gather together. So communicating as frequently as possible. And again, to reinforce what you're saying, it's not begging people to come work with the young people in your church. It's providing opportunities for accountable adult leaders to disciple teenagers in your. In fact, of all ministries, kids and youth ministries should have the stiffest gate to come through, right?
Please.
But being able to communicate the vision behind why we do kids ministries, why we do youth ministries to people, and helping them catch a vision for what it is I think is often where we're lacking, and they get lost in the timeline of all the things that happen on a Sunday morning when those adults are starting to gather.
So, Julie, for you guys, because here's the tension I felt. I felt like for kids ministry, it was more of a struggle to, in youth ministry, I felt like if you finally did all the work, and it took a lot of work to get a great leader, but if you got a great leader, the chances that they were going to really stick around was higher because in order to get there, it was a pretty high commitment.
Sure.
For kids ministry, it seemed like the struggle was more often of okay, this person would sign up, say they'd do it. Yeah, I'll be around for once a month or whatever, and then they'd bail or they wouldn't show up. And it's and because of the number of leaders, it felt like more of a struggle. And I just remember sometimes there being conversation, staff meeting of feeling like we need more help down here. Why aren't we getting more help down here? And that can create some tension,
Yeah. I think so. There is a very a fundamental difference between a kid's pastor and a kid's director. So I am a pastor. I'm credentialed with the Assemblies of God. I've been ordained for several years now. I don't know how many. I think 7 or 8. I have a pastoral heart. So I pastor my team.
That's good.
Right? Whereas a kid's director is probably there to schedule
off the
people to
service.
come.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a huge difference, I
Yeah.
think. And so and this goes back to like lead pastor, like you have to determine for your church what you're looking for. Because if you're looking for just a kids director, and I shouldn't say just because there's so many amazing ones out there, but the mindset of just a kids director to I'm going to show up and I'm going to make sure kids are taken care of.
Right.
That's different than pastoring your team and pastoring children. But there's this huge piece of pastoring your team that I've had people that have been with me this entire 12 years because I believe I'm pastoring them. You know, I care about their life. I'm checking in on them constantly. I'm not just like, you show up once a month, great, good job. Like I'm caring about their life and I'm feeding them and I'm shepherding them and their hearts. And so that is a huge piece that has to be built in. When you are building a team and you're developing that, so I use a model, I try to model Jesus. So we see that he had groups of people, right? Tons of people that followed him. He had the 12. He had the 3, and then he had the 1. Yeah. And so that's what I've kind of established in my ministry, where I have an admin, because again, I am not an organized person. So I need that help. So I have an admin who's kind of my 1, right? They are real close to me. They know the ins and outs. If anyone's going to ask a question on a Sunday, it's going to them, not me, because I'm focused on the spiritual aspect of things, right? So that person is taking care of that. Then I have what I call the core team. And those are the people that head the different areas of my ministry. So there's a nursery core leader, there's a toddler core leader, a 4K core leader, an elementary one, worship, check-in. I mean, there's so many, but all those different core leaders are midweek leaders for Royal Rangers and Girls Ministries. And I meet with them once a month. And so as a core team, we meet, we share a meal together, we share life together, prayer, just hang out and care about each other, and then do the business of like ministry and what are our goals, and keeping that fresh and in their face all the time. The vision and the why is so helpful. And then they trickle that information down to their teams. So I now do not have to oversee 100 volunteers or whatever it is, right? I am pouring into that core team, who then pours into their volunteer teams. And so it's always a work in progress, right? But that's the model. That's what the goal is. That. And so I think that makes a difference.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And you're right. There's a difference between a director and a pastor in the sense of even just a mindset, right? You don't need a credential to have that mindset.
Sure, absolutely.
And but the mindset a lot of times in kids ministry is more of a administrator, schedule blocker. Yes. Let me put all the pieces together, which is important because there's a lot of pieces that are moving. Yep. And I would say more difficult than youth ministry. It's different. Like you've got nursery, you've got kidsmen, you've got Wednesday night. If you do that, you've got a Sunday morning. There's a lot of different elements where youth ministry, it's like, okay, these are our kids. Now you may have small groups and different stuff, but I do think it's a little different. Sure. And so I love that perspective of thinking pastorally. Mm-hmm. So even if right now you're a director, think pastorally.
Yes, right, absolutely, because I love to. Yes, you don't have to have the credential to be or to have a pastor's heart. Right. It's just how you look at your people and how you shepherd them and lead them well.
But also being fully aware that if you don't have the administrative skill sets, you need to put somebody around you.
Know your strengths and weaknesses.
Otherwise, your lead pastor walks down on a Sunday morning when they've got a guest speaker, and it's like, what is going on down here? The kids are everywhere.
Goldfish flying.
Why is the back door open? I just saw 3 kids run out there.
Seriously.
What do you mean you left Timmy back at the camp when you guys were coming back? So
that is one of the uniquenesses about kids ministry over youth ministry is the success of a Sunday morning, which is the lead pastor's heart, depends on kids ministry in a way that it does not depend on youth ministry. That is a reality of it.
That's good.
If you botch kids ministry, you are
You're
ruining
really
his Sunday
big trouble.
morning. Right? If you botch youth ministry, it's like, all right, it's Wednesday night. I expected this. You're a youth pastor.
I remember there was a period of time where up in the big adult service, we're like, what is going? You could hear the bass. We had to tweak the EQ because you could hear this downstairs, like right in the middle of like
a party.
I was like,
while preacher was having.
I was like, I'd be like, all right, we'll just bring the EQ down a bit. Don't change the energy, just bring the EQ down.
That's amazing.
But hey, it was a great reminder there was something going on down there.
That's right.
Let's talk a little bit about like scheduling, because I think this is one of the other friction points that can come up is when you're trying to schedule both both people that have passion for the ministries that they're called to do, and you're a part of one church, but you want to, oftentimes it's like, no, I was going to do that on that weekend, or I was going to have this, and
collaboration across your schedule.
you know, right. And, or like you said, if you do have leaders that are doing multiple things or using different vehicles or whatever, what are your guys' thoughts? Any advice on that, how to really help that become more cohesive and better functioning? Yeah.
I think, so I personally am not a very event-heavy planner. Like I don't like to have events just to have events. So I was speaking with a kids director recently whose pastor told them that they have to have an event every month. And I was like, oh gosh, that's a lot. Like that is a lot of planning. That is a lot of ideas you need to come up with. Like, oh my word. It was overwhelming to me to have to think of 12 events for a year. Because, right, I want to make them really good. I have a standard of excellence. I want to make them meaningful. Like I don't want to do something just to have an event on the calendar, right? I want to make sure that what I'm doing matters and is pushing us forward, like it's leading the vision forward. And so I think if people can get on board with that, and then working together to understand that even if I wanted to have an event, but the youth ministry is having one, looking at the big picture of like the church and the mission, if one is needing to happen at a certain time of year, like go for it. Like I am for you. Like we're next gen. Like we're together in this. So like that's totally fine by me to back off and say, you know what, let me look, and I can change mine to the spring or whatever. Right. So I think that collaboration piece of caring about the ministries, right? I mean, that could be a reality of that. Maybe sometimes we just don't care what the other person's doing. So caring about that and realizing there has to be that hand in hand working together for it to make sense. Like how can we help girls ministries and Royal Rangers that span both ages, right? They are for kids and youth. How can we help that make sense for a family at the church? So if the youth group does small groups, is like the Royal Ranger boy one a small group that they're utilizing? Well, hopefully, because that makes sense, right? It's men mentoring boys, and it's the youth pastor being able to tap into that volunteer base and utilize that as one of his small groups. So I think it kind of comes back to just caring, like caring about what the others are doing, and then looking at the big picture. But again, I'm not super huge event driven. I do retreats for our kids, which was kind of like a new idea, at least in our area, which I have loved. So we do them for toddlers, I do them for our 4K and for elementary age. Now, the little guys, it's just a day at the church. We do not take them anywhere. Don't worry. I'm not taking your toddlers for a weekend.
All right, we're going to Darien Lake.
Parents might love that, actually.
Oh, they would. You'd be like, you're going to watch my kid all night?
Yeah.
Excellent.
No, I will not. But elementary age, so 1st through 5th grade, we go for a weekend, just like a youth group would. And so I also think there's that beauty in like training up the families of like, hey, there's retreat times, and this is what we do at this church. Is a culture of like getting away from the norm and just seeking God. And because that matters, and because I believe in it and our youth pastor believes in it, we're able to like have them at different times of the year. We work that out so that, you know, it does help with things like vans and scheduling and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And you got to think of your families too, right?
Yeah. Well, that's
like,
the huge piece too. Money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like I got to prepare for, you know, and I got a lot of kids, you know, even if you don't have a lot of kids, it's like, still, okay, I got, this is going to cost $100. This is going to cost $80. Is going to.
Absolutely.
But then if you're also looking at your calendar, you're like, oh my, every weekend we've got something.
Yeah. The church is taking over our lives.
Which maybe it should, but in a different
well, maybe not in a good way.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a busyness
not in
way.
A financial commitment kind of way.
Yeah. Well, and I also fight that busyness culture. I do not like that whatsoever. You know, kids are already just so overloaded sometimes with all sports and school and all the things. I'm like, I don't want to add to that as the church. Like so I'm just not a huge throw a million events out there a year.
We were also really conscientious about how many nights a week we were splitting up families too. Like, you know, so if we were doing things, we would try to provide an opportunity where it's just, okay, if we're doing something for kids ministries and youth ministries, they may happen simultaneously. You know, our kids ministries and youth ministry meet on the same night. That's not always the case. Sometimes a youth group will meet on like a Friday night and the kids will be a midweek with adults or whatever. But that's another night that families are apart again. So thinking through your calendar, even just as it relates to how many times are we splitting up families on a given night who are probably already in 1,000 different places on every other night of the week.
Yeah.
Right.
helps you think through how we can serve our families well by bringing them together for simultaneous sorts of things.
Yeah. And that all happens because of conversation. So
Exactly.
together,
Yeah.
right? From the lead down to the kidman,
Correct.
like us all talking and figuring out like how are we best serving families.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I love that mindset, and I do think it's a good reminder too, because the majority of our families, like if you look at like the age demographic of kids, usually they're gonna have a kid at times in kids ministry and youth ministry.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the season I'm in right now. I've got one in kids, one in youth. Now, it won't be that way forever, but typically it's not like, unless they have one child or like, only two kids and they're really close up. So you being strategic as a church and as a youth and kids ministry about really working together, making it feel seamless, making it feel like one ministry, will really benefit those parents because they've got kids that are in both. And so I think what we've been talking about today is just really, really important to be more effective. I think that's how you started this whole thing, was this is going to help us be more effective at our mission, which is making disciples. And so, Julie, thank you for being here. This has been awesome. It's a great conversation. I know we'll have you back down the line in the future. But if people are you on social media, anything like that? If people want to,
Barely.
Barely.
I do have Instagram and Facebook, but like I don't do much with it.
All right.
Except post when I sleep in pools for
true.
BGMC, which I did do this year.
Yes. Yeah. So if you
every once in a while you'll see me out
okay, where
there.
can they find you?
I don't know.
What's your
I'm
What's your
serious.
Instagram name?
I literally don't know.
All right, just
it's
search
probably
up Juli Durst. It's got to be on there
Yeah, you'll
somewhere.
find her somewhere.
I'm so sorry.
If you find a picture of her sleeping in a pool,
Yes,
you will know
you will know.
found the right one.
You've
So,
come to the right place.
yeah. Anyway, thank you for being here. This has been awesome. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next episode.
Peace.